Day live. We're about 26 hours or so from the first pitch of the Twins home opener tomorrow here at Target Field. And as we get into baseball season, America's pastime is certainly exciting. Baseball's history, much like America's, isn't as simple as it might seem. So we're joined now by Seth Tannenbaum, a historian and sports studies professor at Manhattanville University, recently releasing this book called Bleacher, Seats and Luxury Suites, Democracy and Division at the 20th Century Ballpark. An interesting job that you have as a professor in the sports arena. Interesting research that you've done here with this book. I haven't been able to read the whole thing, but I read as much as I could to prepare for this. What led you to researching and writing about racial and economic divides at ballparks?
Well, to start with, I'm a lifelong diehard baseball fan. So I knew this was a project that I could live with for the duration of writing it. That was really key. I took a class in graduate school on consumer culture history, and I took a class on food history, and I started to think about where they intersected. And for me, I thought about ballpark hot dogs. And I started to examine the history of concessions at ballparks and then expanded out to talk about the full fan experience. And that led me from being a history-only sort of student, I was just sort of a standard American history student, into this field of sport history and sport studies.
What's interesting is that, you kind of trace it in the three eras, of the old original ballparks in the urban, in the downtown, and then moving to the suburbs, and then moving back, and tracking the way the economic divide has either followed it or increased with those moves. But starting out, you kind of say that baseball was sort of the melting pot for everybody to enjoy. I mean, tell us about what you found in the origins.
So it absolutely had this reputation and rhetoric of being a place where everybody in the ballpark came together and was equal regardless of their socioeconomic status or their jobs or anything like that. There are famous early 20th century quotes from people like progressive reformer Jane Addams celebrating the ballpark's ability to bring people together, and the concessions pioneer who was most responsible for introducing hot dogs at ballparks, saying things like, well, at the Polo Grounds in New York, the concessions counters, you'd have a banker and a truck driver, and they'd both be having a beer and eating a hot dog right next to each other.
Yeah, and then all standing up to cheer in unison, and these divisions in society just sort of melted away right there.
It certainly had that reputation for the people who could get into the ballpark. But before there were night games, and in northeastern cities there were bans on Sunday baseball, working class people who worked 6 days a week in the early 20th century really could only go to games on national holidays. So that truck driver was not really very likely to be in the ballpark on a standard day.
So you're saying
because they happen.
Yeah, because
go ahead.
Yeah, so you're saying that sort of image and that ideal of this being the truck driver and the banker and everything melting away wasn't necessarily reality.
Not all the time, no. But when you were in the ballpark, that feeling of all standing together and cheering for your team and coming together, that's a real feeling. It's just that not everyone has access to get in there on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and then as we get into the middle part of the last century here, the 50s, certainly the car has a lot to do with this. As you wanted better ballparks, you write about how many of these then moved to the suburbs. And, we had a suburban ballpark here with the old Metropolitan Stadium, which is now the Mall of America, and it was surrounded by parking lots. Now, I would imagine, you write that a lot of these moves were chasing the middle and upper class white baseball fan to the places that they were in the suburbs, but I would also imagine that because everybody's driving, there's also a need to have a ballpark that has a lot of parking. So, I mean, is it kind of a mix of factors here?
I think that's a really good way to describe it, is that baseball owners have found an audience going back to the beginning of the 20th century that's fairly reliable, and that middle and upper class folks who have some money to spend and some time. And then those folks move to the suburbs, but it's also an era when many, many more people across the economic spectrum are driving and wanting to park at ballparks, and mass transit is not as robust as it had been. So that driving is almost also necessary. So it is kind of a push and a pull factor in that way in the middle of the 20th century.
So are you kind of arguing in your research here that was it a motive to follow the middle and upper middle class, or was that sort of a byproduct of moving to stadiums to places where you could park?
I'm arguing that it is a big motive because those owners are seeking profits, and they've had reliable profits from that group of people, and they are fiscally conservative in that they're not really willing to jettison their reliable audience and try and get new people in.
Okay.
So they're going to chase those people who were their core audience, and they move to the suburbs.
And then modern ballparks, as you track that development, many of them moving back into the downtown areas, is obviously parking is different. I mean, there are a lot of parking ramps now that we can deal with. And you kind of write your examples about how the way these ballparks have designed and built, seem to accentuate that economic divide.
They absolutely do, right? One, they're changing the barriers to entry, the distance from various communities and things like that. And still, these owners want always, as they're business people, they always want more profits. So they're going to try and find a way to bring more people in. And one of the ways they can do that is to create more elite spaces and create more spaces that aren't just about watching the game for 9 innings, that are about being entertained in other ways. And that brings in more people than just the crazy diehard fans like me who will sit there on a wooden bench in the freezing cold and watch a game happily. But not everybody wants to do that. So owners shift the ballparks, they shift what's available there, so they can bring more people in.
What movements are you seeing, though, in modern ballparks now to try to be more inclusive?
So there are some. You'll see more efforts in areas where the team isn't as good, and this isn't that surprising. Where the teams are really good, they don't have very many seats, so they don't have too much motivation to try and bring more people in. But in places where the fan base seems to expect the team not to be great, they do things like allowing kids in for free on certain days, or giving kids food vouchers to make the cost more accessible to families, and in the hopes owners would think and executives would think of sort of hooking the next generation of fans.
Yeah.
They still have all of these divisions, but you see more efforts to bring in a wider array of patrons, hoping they will become real fans in areas where the teams are not expected to be really competitive and ticket sales are not as high as in other areas.
Yeah, and you could really equate this across all sports, where you look at stadium designs too, where there's more luxury suites or more clubs or more, more of these high dollar things that sort of divide, but understanding too that as the payrolls go up and the costs of baseball go up, owners are also, they're business people, as you say, they have to find ways to have higher priced portions of the stadium. So part of that is just sort of the evolution of the business.
Yes, it is part of the evolution of the business, and it's complex. I would love, as a baseball fan, for more people to be able to access more freely. But I also, I'm not going to lie, I'm a Philadelphian. Have fun with Mick Abel. I think he'll be quite good for you. But I like it when my team goes and gets the really good players and spends lots of money. And so I'm really of two minds. As an academic, my mind is over here. As a baseball fan, my mind is over here. It's complex, to be certain.
It is complex because it's part of it is just sort of the way that the business models are looking now, and the salaries and the costs and everything. But at the same time, when you look at the ultimate, you're examining the ultimate outcome, which is just sort of enhancing that have and have not divide.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fascinating book. I can't wait to have time to read the entire thing rather than the roughly quarter of it that I was able to get through this morning. Thanks so much for your time. Very fascinating.
Thank you so much.
All right.